from the U.S. looking up, I was like, dang, like both Canada and Australia. I'm like, man, why would you stay there? Why would you live under that when you don't have to? Why would anybody choose to live under that when they could go somewhere else, right? Now, I think you highlighted that part of that in that last question before we took the break. So I want to dig into that a little bit. So while that happened, you were locked down. You couldn't even leave your house.
Exactly.
You chose to work on your writing, your intellect, and building up that, some relationships, podcasting. I want to come back to that. But basically the point is that you weren't really able to leave that environment and go to a different environment because you didn't have the resources to do that.
Exactly.
So without wealth, without money, without the ability to spend or use your money, you don't actually have any freedom.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, like I was saying before we went on the break, you know, I look at like freedom, and like freedom is freedom from both in any type of circumstance that would prevent you from making a decision that you want to make. And so obviously a person, so you can have tyranny of government, right? A person could prevent you from doing something that you want. But also just your own circumstance. It could be tyranny of health, right? Your health doesn't allow you to do that. It could, which is why we say health is wealth. It could also be tyranny of your own wealth, meaning or lack thereof, right? So I don't have the money to travel. I don't have the money to move. I don't have the money to buy a passport. I don't have the money to do whatever, right? So is that some of? I mean, did I frame that up? Is that kind of how you look at that?
Yeah, exactly. Because you know, like as a human being who believes to be who wants to believe in the idea of sovereignty as an individual. The thing is, a lot of governments or a lot of states or a lot of people, they always talk about the sovereignty of a nation, but the sovereignty of a nation as a whole just means that those or at the center, the central authority who dictates or controls that ecosystem or that society, it has its own sovereignty to do what it wants. That's not how I perceive sovereignty. It's not at a collective level sovereignty. It's at an individual level. So the way I see it is that I do not want to dictate my life based on man-made laws. I want to dictate my life based on natural laws and natural circumstances that I need to mitigate and circumvent. In order to do that, I need to understand the parameters and the dynamics that allow me to thrive in this reality. And regardless of which ecosystem I am born or raised in or live in, I must understand it in order to thrive in it. And if I cannot thrive in it, then I must change my circumstances. In order to do that, I must understand how to do so. And that's where the intellectual process comes in. You have to understand the world around you, or else there's no development.
To that point that you're talking about, I just put on Twitter earlier today, an hour or two ago. If you're not following me on Twitter, you should, just at @1MarkMoss. But I put a quote from Ronald Reagan's 1981 inaugural address. So he was, this was January of 81. He was being brought in as president of the United States. And he said something that's used a lot. I was looking up this quote, which is government's not the solution, government's the problem. But I was trying to find what's the context that he's saying that under. And so I went and looked up the whole speech, and I read it, and I clipped some stuff out of there. But he was talking about inflation at the time, and he was saying inflation is not fixed by the government; it's caused by the government. But what he said is, from time to time, we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, and that government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people. So kind of to your point, we're not sovereign individuals. The government's sovereign to do what they want.
Exactly.
We're not sovereign. And so he was addressing that in this address here in 1981. We've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by individuals.
Exactly. It's too complex. It's not. We don't need to learn. We don't need to understand. Delegate that task to somebody else, and your sovereignty will be protected because you have a sovereign nation of a central authority who knows best.
Yeah. And then he goes on to say, but if no one among us is capable of governing himself, then who among us has the capacity to govern someone else?
Exactly. Get your own bed
like,
in order.
Boom. It's like boom, right? Like yes, exactly. Like, so none of us are smart enough to do this on our own. So then you're smart enough to do it for us?
Exactly. We forget that the central authorities, they're also human beings. They are no different than any one of us. The only thing is we seem to assume that the moment they enter that social entity, which is the government, which is no different than any other social entity, that automatically it assumes the responsibility to know best and to do what's best, and that regardless of what it does, it holds no accountability, and that it is the only thing that bestows upon us the reality of the economy, which again is a fallacy, since the economy is here regardless of whether the state exists or not. It is a natural reality given to us. Therefore, it is up to you to ensure your own outcome. And that's where the sovereignty comes in.
So now let's go back to what you said. You were in lockdown. You couldn't leave, unfortunately. So you decided to pour into your own self.
Yes.
And to build up your own toolkit, right? Your own skill set. And why did you choose that? Like why is that your focus?
Why? Because I always enjoyed going out and talking to people and being around people and having conversations and just being outside and doing stuff. I didn't like sitting down and doing nothing. And the moment I was put in that environment, I felt as if I was going to be very unproductive and it was going to waste a lot of my time. And again, if you go back to the classical principles of a lot of Austrians and classical economists, a lot of things like there's nothing more permanent than temporary government programs. And, whenever the government it takes control, it has a hard time letting go. So in my mind, when all this was going down, I was like, I don't think this is going to last 2 weeks, as they said. I don't think it's going to last a couple months. I think this is going to be something that's going to be reoccurring for a long period of time. And so that was bothering me heavily, mentally and intellectually. So I said, I need to find a way to put my energy into something else that I never did before. And the only thing I could think of was starting to write. So I started writing blogs for my podcast, and that turned into writing one book on system dynamics and trying to understand the world I was in and trying to understand the problems heading our way as a millennial who's looking ahead. And then after I decided to write another book after going down kind of like an Austrian rabbit hole, an economic rabbit hole on economics to kind of continue the work of those guys, of the Austrians and everything. And I thought it was the only solution, because I didn't want to feel unproductive just watching TV for 2 years doing nothing. I thought it was going to be the biggest waste of my life. So I wanted to be proud of myself regardless of the situation I was in.
Yeah, so I mean, it was definitely about being productive. To me, from the outside looking in, that's why I was asking the question. Is it's like what you also did though is you increased your knowledge, which also increased your skills or your skill set. And the more skills you have, the more knowledge you have, potentially the more sovereign you can be, because now you have tools and skills that could allow you to make income remotely or locked down or something like that, as opposed to you didn't have those skills before.